Welcome to the KayaCast, the podcast for cannabis businesses looking to launch, grow, and scale their operations.
So, the most controversial man in the extraction industry. Before we start, can you give our listeners a background about yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Josh Swider. I'm the co-founder and CEO of a company called Infinite Chemical Analysis Labs. We're a cannabis and hemp testing facility in California as well as Michigan. Been around the industry for a decade now. I'm an analytical chemist by trade, and kind of out here looking at the public safety sector and differentiating, what illicit cannabis was a long time ago to legal cannabis, and the biggest difference between the two was a testing protocol for safety for consumers.
So you have such an extensive experience in California now, and on the other side of the country, testing extractions, right, for synthetics.
Yeah, so we've done a lot of synthetic work in the past. I would say 4 years. That's where we started to see the hemp industry change into, I would call it, to synthetic production of cannabinoids or cannabinoid-like structures that are synthetic drugs. And then being produced and sold under a thing called the Farm Bill, and then making it out to consumers unknowingly sometimes, and the effects of that could be detrimental in the long run.
You have some wild stories. So what is the current state of the industry with regards to synthetics?
Yeah, so as far as the industry is growing, so the hemp industry, I would say, is not the hemp industry of 4 years ago or 5 years ago. The hemp industry used to be primarily a CBD-based industry, low THC numbers. Now the hemp industry has changed into the cheapest cost provider into anything that looks like a cannabinoid or is a cannabinoid. So what we've seen with synthetics over the last 4 years is the biggest synthetic one popping up into all markets is synthetically created Delta-9 THC. People say, well, it's still THC. Well, it doesn't mean necessarily that the other things that come over during the synthetic process are safe to consume. This is why when you do synthetic production of chemicals for human consumption, you have people like the FDA, the regulating it, because those regulations are vastly different than what you would see in the extraction facility or extracting cannabis, or cannabis or hemp. So when doing these types of things, there's different sets of protocols and safety considerations you use. And we've seen a lot in this realm from, it used to just be Delta-8 production to growing to Delta-9 production. I have a story on that if you want to hear it. To exotic cannabinoids, simple ones that started with the THCP production, to THCP, to HHC, to name a 3-4 letter soup, and you got it, and that's the new cannabinoid of the week. THCX, THC this, that, yeah.
How do these new cannabinoids pop out of nowhere? How does that happen?
I mean, honestly, there's online groups and forums. So the thing is, a lot of this stuff is there are some synthetic organic chemists that kind of dabble in this arena or industry and do things on the back end. And then a lot of people are just learning from either an online forum, like it's not like a Reddit forum, or watching videos. And so the safety implications of that sometimes can be very alarming and scary. And a lot of it's trial and error. So what we've seen too is over the years, I mean, it goes back to like Delta-8, when people were trying to make Delta-9 THC from extracting cannabis or hemp, they would make Delta-8 by accident. And then they realized they were doing something, and then they found it successful. And it's just like I said, Delta-9 synthetically being produced. They were making Delta-8 and it had low levels of Delta-9 in it, and people back then would consider anything above 0.3% Delta-9 THC to be considered cannabis, and they didn't want that. So D9 production, they would say, I got to keep this below 0.3%, and a laboratory that's always, we use accuracy and precision on anything we do in testing, they would call us and say, hey, Josh, this has 1% Delta-9 in it. This is impossible. Another lab says it's 0. And I'm like, well, they're probably not separating it. I'm not sure why they would say 0. It's definitely has it, and go through the ring roll with that as far as a testing lab and a client. And then I remember this one day, this has to be like 4 or 5 years ago, a client called and they had 13% Delta-9. They were yelling at me and telling me, I don't know what I'm doing, an analytical chemist is impossible. He quenched his reaction. He read on the forum that this is the way to do it. And he told me pretty much it was an F off moment at the end to me and hung up. And the next day I get a phone call back from him. Hey, Josh, actually, you're sure it's 13%, right? How can I make that go up? And I was like, whoa, what do you mean? And he's like, well, I can create Delta 9 synthetically and I can do it. And so then I feel like this is about 4 or 5 years ago. The race started on how to now not just make Delta 8, but that's the intermediate between the normal production of Delta 8 production will end up with some Delta 9, is to make the reaction in favor of the Delta 9 pathway and to stick with Delta 9 THC. And that's what you started seeing. Yeah.
So walk me back. What is synthetic? Like, what does that mean? And how do you derive Delta 8 and Delta 9 through a synthetic method?
So synthetic. So the way I do it, I look at it as a chemist perspective. There'll be people with different opinions on it. The hemp industry is one of them. Synthetic chemistry is taking one compound, doing a chemical reaction, and creating another one. So this is primarily done with CBD as a starting material. So when I say primarily, it depends the end product. Some of these hemp cannabinoids can't ever start from a CBD molecule. They're starting from other molecules, so they have nothing to do with hemp in the beginning. So a very common CBD to Delta 8 or Delta 9 reaction is an acid catalyzed reaction. And they do this acid catalyzed reaction to create their product. So, you're a chemistry class, you take one thing, mix another one, mix them together, 1 + 1 equals C and D, different products. So that's what they do, is that they try to control chemical reaction to create a favorable product. And in this case in point, it was CBD to Delta 8 or Delta 9.
So when you're creating a cannabinoid synthetically, what else do you create in that process?
Lots of things. So that's the thing. So organic chemistry or synthetic chemistry is an interesting thing, because we never get what we want. I'm not a synthetic chemist myself. I'm an analytical chemist, but I have a lot of synthetic chemists that work with me. I'm a business partner has a PhD in synthetic chemistry, organic synthetic. So these are these things that happen is when you're trying to make a product, you might make 90% and you did a good job. The other 10% of the products are unknowns or they're unknown. So a lot of times when we do these synthetic reactions, these things called byproducts are made. Byproducts are your unintended result, but it always happens. And so when we look at like a plant like cannabis or hemp, okay, we have a whole industry in chemistry called natural products chemistry. And there's a lot of chemists out there that try to mimic plants, and we're just not as good. So why I bring that up is when you create Delta 9 THC on a plant, you're using something called THCA synthase to create Delta 9 THC. And the wonderful part about, like, say, on a cannabis plant, it always makes the same exact product. And so when we say THC, the interesting part most people don't realize is THC, even Delta 9 THC, comes in 4 flavors. There's 4 things called isomers of them. There's 2 enantiomers, there's a cis and a trans, and then they have 2 different spins. So it's kind of your hands, so they're superimposable images. It's the same thing as in chemistry. Sometimes these things, even if there's the same formula or chemical makeup, if it's done in a different rotation or the way it's structured together, which is a 3D model, one can kill you, one can cure cancer. And this is the same thing with like phthalimide, as an example you heard in the industry, chemistry, or this hemp industry, where one created birth defects and one was a great birth control. And they didn't realize they were creating both kind of left and right-handed molecule because no one did the separation analytically. So when you look at these things, one thing you notice about cannabis, L-sativa, true type 1 plant, is it makes negative trans Delta 9. A hemp plant lacks THCA synthase. A type 3 plant, it makes a racemic mixture of, not racemic, it's a little bit off, but of cis and trans Delta 9. And then chemical conversions always make cis and trans Delta 9. But the thing about the chemical conversions is they make byproducts. There's some of them are some of them are known, some of them are unknown. And every time you switch your reaction parameters, you get more byproducts and different byproducts. And so a lot of times when this synthetic production of chemicals are done, you have someone like the FDA there to make sure that we're consuming these things appropriately. One, you need to look at the analytical study. So, okay, analytical study that we're trying to make here, let's say, is Delta 9 THC. Okay, we live on the fact that Delta 9 THC may be safe to consume. Right? We're going to stand on that. And then the next thing is, what about all the other things that you used? or made during that process. So you'll have those byproducts. Any byproduct over 0.1% composition would have to have two studies done, an efficacy and safety study. So to make sure it's going to affect you, not affect you differently, and that's safe to consume. Those studies have not been done on these byproducts. And that's a very important thing to note. And a lot of these contaminants or byproducts are well above 0.1%. I've screened synthetic delta-9 THC, and I've seen 60 byproducts over 0.1% in one reaction. How many of them I figured out? I figured out a few of them. There's other ones I don't know what they are still. That's a lot of work. I mean, we've been doing this for quite some time. These are done normally at universities that have funding because of free grad students. And they do the work for 4 years, and they figure out one of these byproducts and things like that. So as an industry, we are trying to do this as quick as possible because the amount of byproducts that are being consumed by consumers, a lot of times unknowingly.
So correct me if I'm wrong, is every hemp derived extraction product, they're all synthetic?
CBD used to not be, but there is CBD now being manufactured by the barrel load, and they're not even starting, they're synthetically making it, and that gets shipped over in barrels from overseas. And that's a lot of times the starting material to make these other cannabinoids. The most of them are synthetically produced in the hemp industry. Not all of them, I could honestly say most. And each analyte has a different way. So like my laboratory 2 years ago was the first laboratory in the commercial cannabis and hemp testing industry to get a regulated certified method where I can distinguish the difference between delta-9 THC's origin. So what I mean by that is, did it come from a cannabis plant? Did it come from a hemp plant? Or was it synthetically produced? So I say delta-9 because delta-8 I can tell you too. THCV I can tell you. Everything has different byproducts and different telltale markers of where it came from.
What is THC8 and THC9? Are these
delta-9? It's where your hydrogen is. So you're just moving it, and you'll get different binding affinities to your receptors. So like delta-9 THCs, it'll get less high. It doesn't stick around on your receptor as long. And that's kind of what the difference is between it. And normally when you increase a tail length on a compound, so like how long the carbon chain is on the end, the more sticky it is, you can think. The more sticky it is, the longer the chain is, the more of effect you get. So why, a lot of times with drug, I'm going to say this in context of drugs because this is something they do, is like you have Percocet, you have heroin, you have fentanyl. Why is fentanyl so much more effective to the users? Because you have a longer chain on it, and it sticks to those receptors a lot longer, and people get a higher from it, more or less.
Oh, that makes sense.
And that's why you hear things like THCP, right? So delta-8, delta-9 is just going to be pretty much the same exact chemical formula, but you're just switching it where a chemical bond is. And then a THCP is a different compound that just has a longer chain. So you have your backbone of the THC. And you can think to keep adding to that chain. And these are why you're starting to see so many different analogs or THC analogs. And I call them synthetic drugs because a lot of these things have not been proven to be found on plants. There's, like, just a case in point, THCP, there's people that argue on this, that they found it once in 1970 and hasn't really been reproduced. I can tell you from hundreds of thousands of samples we run yearly that we're not seeing it in plant material and hemp or the cannabis division, THCP. So my determination is I'm not seeing it. I can't find it. So that's why I would call it a synthetic more. And then the industry also uses this term called semi-synthetic, where if it is starting from a cannabinoid like CBD and going to another known cannabinoid, then we call it semi-synthetic. But the chemist in me calls that synthetic chemistry. I mean,
just synthetic.
Yeah.
Is this a problem in the cannabis industry as well, or is just hemp?
Oh no, this is infiltrated into the cannabis industry. So the cannabis industry, you're seeing these being used, and it's not always bad. Synthetic. So this is a very, very high level thing. I would say synthetic does not equal bad. Synthetic done wrong equals bad. And I normally not. I say that saying that to who I'm talking to, and maybe I shouldn't be saying it to the general public because I'm not saying synthetic does not equal bad. It can very well. You have to do it right. You have to do it correctly. And this is one of those scary games you play with if it's not an acute thing, as in very dangerous, very quick, you're not going to see an onset. But these are those things you find out after 10 years of someone consuming something. Oh, look, this caused cancer, that byproduct. Oh, too bad, everyone that's been consuming it. We didn't know. And
How
that's
do
the
you
thing we don't want to do.
how do you know as a shopper today, and these compounds, where are they used in? Is it in gummies, edibles, and also vapes, or
Everything.
what? Everything, even flour. Flour is good.
Flour, yeah, no, because flour, a lot of the flour and okay, there's THCA flour, which is really cannabis. Because again, I distinguish. So I go to meetings and I ask questions sometimes that are more difficult for people. So a lot of times when people are giving presentations or having round robin or discussions on stage, they'll throw terms out like hemp, cannabis, synthetic, derived, and I always just go, can we go back to the basics, everyone on stage who just use all those words? What does that mean? And no one will ever answer these questions because people are very scared to say what they are. So I define cannabis as a type 1 plant that produces THCA through THCA synthase. Type 3 plant would be more of your hemp plant. And then any of these hemp derivatives are synthetic drugs for the most part. And you can create synthetically any of the cannabinoids, but it's just going to come down to efficiency.
So why is this a problem in the cannabis industry if the plant itself has THCA?
Yeah, so because you can do it cheaper. So here's an example. CBD a long time ago, I remember a CBD rush came out with the hemp industry, right? CBD kilos were like $20,000 a kilo. This is CBD isolate. That price has dropped down to like $200 over the course of 6 or 7 years. So when they start with that CBD material at $200, they can do this acid catalyzed reaction cheaply, and that they don't do the appropriate cleanup step to remove the byproducts and also the chemicals they use to do the production, you can make this stuff for $300 a kilo. So now your cannabis industry, when you do an extraction and you're, extracting cannabis plant, using 10 to 1 trim, you can kind of think you use 20 pounds of trim to make a kilo or so. It becomes more cost prohibitive, and your price on that with the largest scale manufacturer somewhere in the $600 to $800 range per kilo. So now you just undercut the price. But I'll say this: I do know people that make Delta 9 THC the appropriate way. Their price of production is $20,000 because the production is not the expensive part; it's the cleanup to make it compliant under FDA standards of removing the chemical byproducts and also removing the chemicals, reagents they use. Those can be the expensive steps of this, not the production. So it infiltrates the cannabis industry because it can undercut the price. Sometimes the cannabis industry doesn't know. Like sometimes I tell all people in the cannabis or hemp industry, so the deal is too good to be true. It probably is. If someone's underselling a price or something, it's probably not the same thing they're really selling.
How do I, as a consumer, if I'm in the store, know if I'm taking in something that's not synthetic versus synthetic?
So you can synthetic, if you were concerned about synthetic, you can say, if you haven't heard if it's not Delta 9 THC or CBD, things like that, and it's these new exotic ones, they're synthetic, hands down. Mm-hmm. Delta 8 is synthetic because Delta 8 is produced so lowly on any type of plant, the extraction cost of it would be $50,000 a kilo. When you go buy a vape pen for $10 for a gram, well, $50,000, that would be $500 a gram vape pen. Unless you're paying $500 for that Delta 8 vape pen, it's not real. It's synthetically produced because you couldn't have extracted it. Do you see what I'm saying? So when you go into this market, you can assume that if it's exotic, new type of thing, it's going to be synthetic. And then if it's a traditional cannabinoid, if it's synthetic or not, you have to go to the brand and the trust and the value of that. So what I mean by that is people that go above and beyond. There's organizations started out there that are doing this. ASTM, it's an international standards recognized thing. There's new stickers that they've been working on to talk about synthetic. There's a standard to make synthetic cannabinoids that I was heavily involved in for the last year and a half to set a bar of if you're going to do it right. That's being under review. So it's hard as a consumer. But I'll tell you this. As a consumer, if something is cheap and being low cost, the more likely that synthetic is greater. The things that I've seen left over in synthetically produced cannabinoids scare me It scares me for people's health. I'm not saying all hemp material is bad, but a lot of times I recommend to my family not to consume hemp material because today's hemp material is not the hemp material of yesterday. There's very few. There are good companies. There are not good bad. There are companies out there that do true CBD products and true hemp products. And I tell you, you have to find a trusted source or a trusted vendor, and that's who you stick with. You don't go out and venture out and buy random products from cheaper sources. But then that's again risk management on health, right?
So you're sounding the alarm. You saw this as a problem, and you sounded the alarm on this. Are the regulators on this? If cannabis reclasses to Schedule 3, does the FDA review it or?
So the FDA has known about this for a long time. So I'm a part of an organization called ACIL, it's American Council for Independent Laboratories. It's about an 87-year-old, 90-year-old division. It's a bunch of analytical chemists, some of the biggest labs around the United States that don't test cannabis. This is analytical chemistry that we've been working with on the background with FDA doing talks about this stuff and what's being seen in the market for a long time. So they're very well aware of it, and if you read how the FDA has nothing to do with hemp right now. There's no regulation that demands them to, or no law, no legislation has been passed. The USDA has the only one that has anything to do with hemp, but you got to remember that USDA's hemp material is only the plant material grown, and that is regulated according to the USDA as total THC. Anything above total THC of 0.3% is cannabis, and that is not actually hemp. And you'll have a lot of lawyers that will try to argue this. But all I could say is go on the USDA's website, and there's a very spelt out equation for you that says how to calculate total THC. Any USDA grown hemp would have to be tested by a USDA approved laboratory that must be using this calculation. So that's why THCA flower is actually all cannabis if it's above 0.3% total THC, and it couldn't actually be sold under the USDA's guideline or the Farm Bill, in my opinion, as far as following the train of me testing product and following regulations set up by the USDA. That's a long-winded answer.
You're blowing my mind right now. So if you're living in Texas, these states that are not legalized for cannabis and you're ingesting in hemp, you got to make sure that you're buying it from the right vendor.
Right vendor, and a lot of times, I go all over the country to conferences and other things. I stop at stores, gas stations, everything. And most of the time in the states that don't have legalized cannabis, they're the worst. As far as the products on the shelf, I'll buy them, I'll test them. I'll find contaminants in these things that no one should be consuming. A lot of them are dosed. You buy a package that says, these are the cannabinoids in it. They're so far off on them. I've seen them go up or down. And what the scary part is, when you look at this kind of stuff too, is okay, let's say I decided I'm going to consume THCP, and I bought this gummies, and it says 10 milligrams THCP in it. And I buy it, and I eat one, and I don't feel anything. So then I go ahead and I eat 2 next time, and I eat 3. And that package was actually wrong. There was only 1 milligram of THCP in it. And I say, I'm going to go ahead and venture out. I'm going to buy a new vendor. And this one says 10, but it really had 100. These are real case scenarios that I've seen. And now I eat my 5 gummies like I'm used to eating. Holy problems. So I work with doctors around the country, nurse groups, organizations that send us samples of people, like children that went into a coma for consuming THCP gummies.
I get so confused when I hear THC something, P8.
Yeah, and it's scary. So this is the Texas, what it's facing is the amount of stuff on the shelf that matches the product label or anything else. It's scary. And then they're just mixing all the synthetic cannabinoids together, selling it as a product, calling it hemp, and then there's no enforcement behind it. So what I mean by that is people say, well, if it's illegal, it's legal. It actually, the FDA says you can't put it in anything. So these products can't go in food. If you're buying a gummy that's not Farm Bill compliant, technically, because the FDA couldn't say this, because the FDA you can't put that in that food product. So these are those catch-22s. It's just the thing is there's no one enforcing it. So if there's a law against something and no one enforces it, guess what? It's seen as legal.
Yeah.
That's how my personal opinion on it.
So what is the status of the industry on where we are today?
It's all over the place. Each state to state's different. Federal's different. States are going back and forth. Legislation's getting passed to ban intoxicating hemp, and then it gets overturned and it goes back. It's like a volleyball going back and forth here. And what we're seeing is you're starting to see at the federal level more talks about this. And I think you said Schedule 3. Trump was talking about it last week or this week, I believe. And it's like it's just thing is just all I did was say the word, and now the industry blows up with 5,000 different publications saying, "Oh, he's saying it. Oh, he talked about it. Oh, it's going to go legal." It's like this has been the news for the last like 7 years. I feel like no one really knows where it's going.
I feel like the cannabis industry and the silver market very very much alike. You know, any news is good news.
Good news, yeah.
Let's latch onto it.
Yeah, that's what it is. It goes anywhere. I mean, you are starting to see a lot more coming out with the banning of intoxicating hemp, clarifying what the Farm Bill is. We got to remember, like, you have lawmakers that their whole job is to do what? Make laws and legislation. So, but the thing is, what happened with this Farm Bill is like it's kind of been mocked. These people that wrote this thing created a loophole. That's what everyone says. Last time I checked, you don't mock the people that made the laws and then ask them to be on your side. So that's what's kind of happened, I would say, over the last 5 years. And like it's been taken too far. And I wish in so many different ways, like an inch was given and a mile was taken in the direction we've gone the mile in is scary. It's for public safety. You know, I really hope people take that into account, because a lot of times when I look at this as a big picture thing, when you start to look at negative health effects of an item or a new product on a shelf, you know, so you say, okay, we're going to look at the negative health effects of cannabis potentially. These studies are ongoing right now. And then a lot of times when it's nurses and doctor groups, they look at the ER or things that are coming in. And what happens is they find a vape pen in someone's pocket. How do they determine what this vape pen is? Well, the physician says, oh, this is a cannabis vape pen, and this person had this problem. What if that was a hemp product or vice versa? So like it's a dangerous game where you are given an inch with the legalization of cannabis products by state decision. And then you're muddying the water by going into the hemp division and making all these synthetic drugs and synthetic compounds and calling them hemp and then selling them into the thing. And then when we look at negative health effects of any of these products, because it will happen. I mean, anything, we do studies to check the negative health effects after we legalize it. And where it goes back to is, are we ever going to be able to distinguish if someone consumed this hemp product, this cannabis product, this synthetic? No, it's all going to be classified as the same thing. Hemp and cannabis created this negative health effect. And that's where, in my personal opinion, it becomes scary for any industry. I personally believe in THC cannabis material, that it should be legalized. It has benefits for people. And these could get taken away because we're taking a mile on the other end of it.
You're so right, because nobody is going to care about the nuance. It's just a headline, and this product is bad. And even though it's synthetic and it's not synthetic, no one's going to care.
No one will. And the outcome of it, and I pray to God that it doesn't come out this way. But the odds, the statistical odds of this going bad, get greater and greater every new synthetic compound we do. Every unqualified chemist making these things or making them and throwing the bottom dollar in front of public safety. The odds that this turns out poorly for us as a society is greater and greater.
You're blowing my mind, because I had it on my list to go to, say, Minnesota and check out some drinks, right? And, hemp beverages are the thing right now that's kind of at the forefront of the beverage industry. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if that's a good thing to consume.
So trusted providers. So there are trusted providers in the hemp beverage industry.
Who? Can you share names?
I'll share producers. There's two large producers of all the emulsions for these beverages that throw into the primary. It's Vertosa is one, and they screen, make sure they're not using synthetic. They've been doing that for years, and they hold a higher bar to testing and making sure they're sourcing their stuff. And then there's Oh my gosh. There's one other large producer, and it goes into these lot of beverages. And then this is always the question. It's like, so then you talked about beverages too. As a scientist, this is I'm not a medical doctor, as a chemist, if I was saying the mode of ingestion, the safest mode of ingestion would be eating it, not inhaling it. So if you're going to do a hemp beverage, it's probably the statistical odds that it's going to be negative health effects. It would be less than doing the things like inhaling them or large consumption of them. So it's a less consumption, so it's probably going to be safer in the long run. I'm not saying it's safe. I'm not saying if it is or if it isn't. But if I said risk-based analysis, that would be the lower end of the totem pole. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
If you are consuming synthetically. Yeah. But then the need, the consumers should be demanding it. Consumers, I want to ensure that this product isn't. There is testing for beverages that you could do to determine if it's synthetic or not. If you want to consume. So this is where the tricky is. Where did the THC come from? Let's not play that game, because if I told you that, maybe we're all consuming cannabis beverages and we call them hemp. Because I can tell you if it's hemp or cannabis THC. So I'd rather see that being done and a demand for that by the consumers, that they hold the producers and production of these beverages or any of these hemp products accountable to ensure they have the safety. And if they don't want to, then at least give the notice. I think the people should have the right to choose and know what they're going to consume.
The problem is people don't know.
Yeah.
They don't know. I hear synthetic. I know it's bad, but the byproducts, I had no idea of what the byproduct being. That's the issue.
So here's a case study that we've done for many times. So we talk about byproducts. Byproducts scare me. Unknown scares me on these things, synthetic production. But then another thing that's not as unknown, that's even more scary, is like a lot of times when you do these things like synthetic CBD to delta 9 THC conversion, a common reaction that was used is an acid catalyzed reaction with PTSA, that's paratoluene sulfonic acid, right? And this acid is extremely harmful to your lungs if you don't want to inhale it, or breathe it. So if as a chemist, you have something called safety data sheets, and they're very warning about this stuff. And there you want to know the scary part is this PTSA can be found in a lot of the synthetic delta 9 produced, and I've seen it up to 3%. Wow. In a vaporizer pen. So you're getting these vaporizer pens, people are inhaling PTSA, and that's going to be a long-term thing. It's not going to be instant, but the degeneration of your lungs will happen over time if you consume this stuff. So this is stuff like, this is a known product, a known contaminant that is health. But guess what? The hemp industry doesn't have to scan for safety. It is not required. But there are hemp companies out there that do go above and beyond. And those
is the cannabis industry required to scan for safety?
Not PTSA, but safety stuff. There's different ones. But again, the cannabis industry was built on regulations. So this is where I go back to what I was originally talking about. Every type of chemical reaction or any type of production of these things for human consumption has to undergo a different protocol of testing. So the appropriate protocol of synthetic production of cannabinoids is not the appropriate safety protocol testing for grown extracted cannabinoids. Those are two different safety production methods that you need. So in FDA or synthetic production, what you would do is you would work with a lab producer. They would disclose everything they used in the production of said analyte, let's say call it delta 9 THC. That lab would have screening protocols for those residual chemicals, one, byproducts like we talked about, and then they would have to meet a criteria to make it onto the shelf. All that is being skipped for the most part. So we took out the safety part of the production of synthetic.
Oh my God.
And then you'll hear people, they make vitamin C. Yeah, they do make vitamin C, and they figured out how to do it safely, and they have screening protocols internally how to do it, and they're following a standardized method to do so. So like, it's funny, but the arguments of the other side of it, and I know the consumers don't know a lot of this because they're not chemists, and they're not around it, and that's one thing I've noticed in the industry is like industry people that are heavily been involved in this industry for a long time. We start to, even I find myself guilty of this. You start to like think everyone knows this stuff. Just because you're ingrained and you're surrounded by it, and you're like, oh, this is common knowledge, and you realize it's not common knowledge, and this is those things that people should know, and that's why I come on these types of things, and I'm willing to always talk and educate from my perspective of what I see and what I see, and I mean I've seen a lot of things in this industry. People say a decade, it's not that long for a career or anything else, a decade in the cannabis and hemp industry, you're like a 100-year-old dog. It's a long time. You've seen a lot of things.
Gosh, now I don't vape. I'm not a vapor, but if I did, I would buy local. I would visit the place that makes it. I would make sure that it's extracted from actual real plants and it's not synthetic.
So in the state of Michigan, in the legal cannabis industry, I'll talk about this study openly. There's an organization that I work with called MISCO. It's Michigan for Safe Consumer Access of Cannabis Products. It screened the top 30 brands from Headset Data. Headset Data categorizes like how much sales are done by each product or vendor. So it took the top 30 of them, chose 22 of the brands out of it, 2 SKUs from each of them. 56% of those brands were synthetic Delta-9 on the legal cannabis industry in the state of Michigan. And then out of the 56% that were failing for synthetic, about 30% of that contained PTSA.
Jesus.
So this was
Wow.
a study done in Q2 of 2025. So this is not that long ago.
Wow. That's so you would just avoid vapes altogether and just smoke flower.
Yeah.
You want to be
As long
safe.
as any of this stuff, it scares me. I'm not saying to avoid a product. Again, you can find the producers going above and beyond to produce a clean product or doing. I mean, I work with people that produce in California that go so far above the regulations to make sure their product's safe that those are the people that should be being most successful in this industry, because they are looking out for the future of the consumer and using everything they can to keep them safe.
I wanna pivot just a little bit because you have really extensive background on helping companies yield better extractions during the extraction process, yield better outcomes. If I was a producer today and I wanted to get better yield, what should my thought process be in addressing this problem?
Yeah, so those things that we helped out. So what I've always seen, so we're an analytical lab, and we're a bunch of chemists. So we're a chemist-owned company, chemist-ran company. 75% of my staff hold bachelor's degree in chemistry or higher. So we always consult and help out with this kind of stuff. And when I take a look at yields or anything else to be more productive or more successful for our clients, I've never charged anyone $1 for consulting, because I feel if they're more successful, they test more product, I'm more successful. And I also find it that I have a good amount of PhDs and advanced level staff, and they find, as chemists, we always find problems and troubleshooting fun. That's just, we're weird people. We like to look into things unknown. So I find it as entertainment value for my employees. So I always give it away for free. But as far as yields or anything else, it starts with, like, if you're doing any kind of production of anything, you got to look at it as a macro things. How can you produce more? How can you be more efficient at it? And you would have to go back and testing all the different methods doing so. So like we've been working with people doing this for, like I said, a decade now. And it starts with having accurate testing. And I'm not just saying that because I'm a testing lab, but if you're trying to calculate how your yields could increase and you use 5 different testing labs and they're giving you 5 different results with very large variances, you can never do so, because you would need to make sure that your yields are coming out consistent. So I would say, like, if I was extracting THC from a product, right, I would track the THC in milligrams from the plant material to the extracted material to the final product, and then you'd calculate your overall yield of that. And then you could change some of your production methods one at a time and say, what happens to that yield? Did my 80% yield become 90? We've helped people a long time ago. This is back when people were doing white film distillation in warehouses with 100 of them running. It's just like where the industry's come. And we've seen people go from 50% yield up to 80% yield in a week, because they could just get better efficiencies at doing it. And all we did was give them some suggestions on parameters to change, and they changed them. I mean, a lot of people have done this over the years now, but that's one thing we look at and try to help our clients get more efficient at what they're doing so they can still be profitable in this industry.
50 to 90% is bonkers.
Yeah.
That's
a lot. This is like
overnight.
10 years ago. Yeah. Oh, yeah. That was back when people were selling liters of cannabis for $10,000.
Yeah.
For a kilo, and that was a major profit change for them.
What are some of the biggest common mistakes that companies do during the extraction process?
I would say not tracking what you're doing. The biggest waste mistakes is, let's say you're doing extraction process, you're not screening for contaminants appropriately in the beginning. Like they're buying the trim material and just taking the trim and going to extraction and spending a lot of money on that. And they, oh, look, that trim material was pesticide ridden. And now I have very high concentrations of pesticides in my final product and I can't sell it on the shelf. So I'll sell to the hemp market. Sorry, I probably shouldn't take that jab. That's what I've seen before. But as far as what we see is simple things like that, creating a protocol on what to do when you're intaking a sample, sampling the sample, and then going from there, and then use the same laboratory that gives you consistent results to be able to track this stuff so you can improve. I've seen so many people that in production that they run down the wrong path and start running down the rabbit hole to get a better yield, and they're following, the testing protocol, the COAs or their analysis, and they think they got a better yield, so they keep changing something in the wrong direction, getting further and further away from it. And I've seen people waste so much money on this, like I'm talking millions of dollars going down the wrong pathway. I remember, this is a weird story, but it's funny, there's like a million of them. There was a chicken farmer that thought he could feed CBD to the chickens and then CBD would be in the eggs. So he was creating CBD eggs. And there was a lab out there telling him he was doing it. And lo and behold, he wasn't. Feeding a chicken CBD and getting CBD to come out of the egg is a totally different thing. It doesn't happen. So like this guy spent years of his life going down the rabbit hole because of a misquantification by a laboratory.
That
it's just funny. There's a million of them. But.
Well, yeah, that makes sense. I mean, if you're in the business of extracting, one, you got to make sure that the product going in is clean. So you make sure that you properly test the product going in, and throughout each phase, of the process, you have to test each phase to see if you're marching towards the right direction, and you can isolate the processes of that you're looking to fix.
Yeah, setting up a parameter on testing and changing one parameter at a time and checking that next stage to where we got to see if you're getting increased yields and things of that nature. That's the important part of doing it. And then,
it's meticulous, and you just have to do the work, or you're going to pay the price at the end.
Yeah, and that's why we always consult for free, because a lot of us are chemists, and we are very meticulous at doing these things, and we've done in other divisions other than cannabis extraction, and we know the rigor that goes into this synthetic production or any kind of chemistry process, so we can do this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Josh, before I let you go, anything else you want to talk about? You've scared the shit out of me in this podcast.
Not the intention. I think the other things I would say or talk about is like, I think if people want to see this industry continue, let's hold a higher bar. Let's hold some higher standards to what we're doing. Ensure that the companies that you're working with or consuming or buying from are doing something to make sure they're creating a safe product for you. The last thing we want this industry to end up as is a shutdown industry because negative health effects came to it, or children growing up without their parents because they consume this product for so long they're no longer around for them to grow up with. And that's really what pushes me to continue in this industry and continue to expand safety testing on hemp cannabis products, to look at more of the unknown sometimes in the standard things out there. And I would say anything else as far as that, always happy to work with people, always happy to talk. If anyone has differing opinions, more than happy to jump on a phone call, talk about it, go on any kind of meeting or anything. I don't have to, as a chemist, we all don't agree with absolutely everything, or as a person. And I'm happy to hear other people's opinions about why they thought I was wrong or right on any of this stuff, or if they support it, or if they think there's things that could be done better, or any other problems out there that they think need solving.
Josh, before I let you go, how can our listeners find you?
So you can always find our website. It's infinitecal.com. And on there's different ways to chat between it, and you can get a hold of me through that website pretty easily.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for listening to the KayaCast podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast in your favorite podcast app, or visit our website to access the full archive of episodes from the show.